a choice right now, between fear and love. It's just a ride.
Out of the dark night of ignorance and into the shining light of truth.
Expounding reality.
A population of citizens capable of critical thinking.
We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are.
There's a level of reality where everything dissolves into an ocean of energy.
We empower our experience by insisting on our authenticity.
That's very profound. Very.
Expanding reality.
Josh, Cutchin, you are easily one of my favorite authors in the world and easily one of my favorite people in the world, dude. You have just a phenomenal collection of books, which we're absolutely going to talk about here this evening. The first of which, actually, we're going to feature in this episode, your Where the Footprints End. My God, man, I heard Mysterious Universe cover this a couple years ago, one of my favorite shows ever, and I was just blown away by what they were talking about in here. And then all of a sudden, I get an amazing message from this guy that says, hey, I'm cleaning out my closet and I've got some books. And then you send me this amazing box of books, dude. So I want to let everybody know in the show notes as well, he has signed these. If you guys hit me up, I will get to them in order of those that reached out and I'll send you some. But Josh has gifted us with these books. So check the show description down there. Just reach out expandingrealitypodcast@gmail.com and email me and we'll send you some. So we're going to nerd and fanboy out on here a little bit more, but to let everybody know, again, all the ways to find Josh, of course, located down in the show description. Josh, dude, an honor. You're a brother. I'm a huge fucking fan, and we're going to talk about it. You're going to gain a ton of new fans with this audience. I know it. And you're right on time for everything right now. You're breathing new, beautiful wind into our sails here with these awesome illuminations and, like, blowing my mind. When you've been doing this as long as I have, and any of us, I suppose, you get, like, kind of fatigued of the old shit, but you breathe so much new life and bring so many new connections that, again, can't wait to talk to you about this. So, my friend, after all that, will you please just in your own words introduce yourself for the audience, my friend?
Well, before I do that, I would like to express some appreciation about that sort of evaluation of what I'm trying to do, because I feel like so many of these dialogues that we have in this space are just kind of circling the drain, the same circles. We're just running in circles. It's the same thing. Like, we need ufology needs another book on Roswell, like a submarine needs a screen door. You know what I mean? Like, it's just it's done. It's like, can we move on to something else? So I really appreciate that someone has perceived that I'm just trying to do something new and different, and even if it's not correct, it's just a new way of thinking about it, and that new way of thinking might lead us to thinking in the right direction, right? So I guess my genesis is that I grew up a monster kid. I was really into creature features and stuff like that. Like, the first movie I ever saw was the 1933 King Kong, and I was a big Ray Harryhausen kid, and then Stan Winston, all those great, creature designs and animatronics. So I think it's a natural progression from there to something like cryptozoology. Only in recent years did I find out that my father was once subscribed to the BFRO newsletter, which I was like, oh, okay, well, that maybe it's genetic too. But I grew up in a household that was always really encouraging me to read, and if it happened to be strange stuff, then that's fine. Most of the stuff in those early years was Bigfoot. I had my own problems with the UFO question simply because I was only looking at the extraterrestrial hypothesis, which I'd already sort of Goldilocks to my way out of by that point. But so this has sort of been running in the background all these years, and it was in 2012 that I got my first desk job. After spending 4 years in grad school and getting 2 masters, I'm like, what the heck do I do? That's a whole nother story in and of itself, right? How I got to that point. But I got my first desk job, and it was about an hour commute there and an hour commute back. And that was in what I still consider like the golden era of paranormal podcasts. I realize that there are a lot more now, but like just something about that particular like 2012 to 2015 window. I guess it was part of it's now today. Like, so there's so many good shows out there that I kind of feel overwhelmed. And back then it was like, there are like 10 really high quality, top notch shows. And like, you can listen to them all, but now I just can't listen to everything that's out there. And it's all so great. But, as I was doing this commute and listening to these shows again, it was really rekindling my interest in all this. And I remember distinctly that one of my sisters-in-law got me a gift card to Amazon for Christmas or birthday or something. And I was like, okay, I'm going to indulge and get a Bigfoot book. And I picked up a copy of J. Robert Alley's Raincoast Sasquatch, which is a fantastic book. If you haven't read it, strongly recommend it. But one of the things that he mentions in there is that one of the Alaskan tribes has a Bigfoot analog called the Bequess. And if you're approached by the Bequess will give you food, but you shouldn't take the food because A, it's actually dried, it's bark disguised or glamored, to use a fairy term, to appear like dried salmon. And two, if you take the food from the Bequess, you'll be trapped with the Bequess forever. And I said, that sounds a lot like Western European fairy folklore, where if you take food in fairyland, you're trapped in fairyland. And I'm like, Alaska's a long way from Ireland, you know? And this is a pre-Columbian belief. Like, how do we reconcile the fact that these two groups of people came up with this exact same, very specific, I think, idea so far apart? And I was like, somebody should write a book on that. I kind of sat around and I was like, is it me? Am I supposed to be the one who'll do that?
It's you,
I
dude.
was hoping that Nick Redfern or somebody would like pick it up and run with it before I had to. But anyway, so I wrote it. Wrote my first book, A Trojan Feast. Pretty much, I was working at the University of Georgia, and summers are kind of down times for staff at university. So I pretty much wrote the book during the summer at my job. But then, the release of A Trojan Feast coincided with me quitting my day job. Not because I had anything lucrative lined up, but because it was just time, and it seemed like a nice inflection point, right? On when to make that change. And since then, I've just been writing and playing and teaching. I've had twin boys with my wife, and since then, I've stopped teaching, and right now I'm just playing and writing, and somehow I'm making it work financially. So it's a real blessing and a real honor. A Trojan Feast it's a weird thing, man. Like, and it's hard to describe, I guess, like for a bunch of normies who are into this stuff like we are. It's like, it's like growing up watching LeBron play basketball, and then someday, like, you're on the court with LeBron, and he's like, "You've got game," It's like, so, and that's sort of the way it was with me. Like, I released A Trojan Feast, and there are all these people whose books I had on my bookshelf since middle school, who are saying really kind things about my work, and I was like, "Whoa, this is kind of, this is wild." And that relationship has since blossomed in some really beautiful ways. My first three books were published through Anomalous Books, which is owned by Patrick Weege, and Patrick's somebody who I was familiar with, again, all the way back to middle school, and is an absolute prince of a human being. So it's kind of weird to be enmeshed and consider these people that I looked up to like peers now. But it's been a beautiful journey, and it continues to pay dividends. And I think that, I love music, I love musicians, that's a lot of what I do. But as a rule, I think that the sort of weird communities, the paranormal communities, in my experience, have been a lot less envious and a lot more welcoming than some musician circles I've been in. So yeah, it's been a great journey, and I'm just getting started, I hope.
Oh, you got so much to look forward to, and we're grateful to pick up on this part of your journey because we're all together. We're with you so much, dude. You have so much wind coming from all of us here, dude. Just so, again, guys, located down in the show notes, joshcutchin.com. If you want to go straight to the book /publications at the side of that. Now, as you can tell, this man should be protected at all costs. Support this man. Easily, again, one of my favorite people. I know we talk about a lot of folks on here, but again, I've got a stack of books here that I'm grateful to have and cannot wait. Like I said, I'm going through this one, and you and I are going to talk about this specifically. So, again, guys, we're going to make a part 2 for this. So look forward to this being sort of a series. We're going to go through your work with you here. We're also going to sort of announce here a book club of sorts that we're going to start probably in the summertime. That is going to be where we are going to go through this and more works with Josh. So we're going to work out ways that you guys can get these books at a really cool deal. As well, you can go through these with us in Zoom meetings where we all hang out together as a community and we all talk about these ideas. And I'm sure Josh is going to be able to, out of that one experience, get a whole book's worth of your experiences, which we would love to hear about and to share. So, dude, tell us first about, you said play and musician as well. This is a 2-part question. So if you don't mind, let the folks know what you do and what you play. And then 2, Have you noticed a correlation of an abundance of musicians in the paranormal or ufology or anything like that group?
Yeah, those are great questions. So the first one is that I'm a classically trained tuba player.
Goddamn right you are.
That's all I play. I don't play bass. I don't play trombone. I play trombone at the level of a highly talented but very unmotivated sophomore in high school. Like that's so like I just play tuba. And through a series of basically overused performance injuries, I sort of got knocked off that classical track. And those have since healed because I kind of stopped playing as much and gave it some time. But it really allowed me to transition into what has always been my primary passion, which is, New Orleans music, for lack of a better term. So, the trad jazz stuff, the New Orleans brass band stuff. But also, there have been the biggest honor that I've ever gotten has been some local bands who have called me up and been like, yeah, our bass player is sick this week. Can you come sub on tuba? And I've done it, and it's just been it's been a great experience to play in a different setting. Yeah, it's pretty cool, and it can it can be a surprisingly nimble instrument in the right hands. So through a combination of hard work and attrition in the music scene, I've become Atlanta's first called jazz tuba player. Now, granted, that's like saying. I can say this because I'm a big guy. It's like saying you're the skinniest kid at fat camp, It's like, well, first call jazz tuba player. There aren't when you need that sound, you need that sound, but it's not exactly a vibrant scene like it would be in New Orleans. So that's sort of been my journey, and along the way I ended up picking up a master's in music and a master's in journalism. So the master's in journalism is what informs this other aspect of what I do. And I have noticed that trend. I can think of multiple individuals off the top of my head who are not only just, musicians, but also highly competent musicians and or musicians who, make a substantial portion of their income off of music, like myself. And I can't help but wonder, because you see this amongst experiencers too, not just like researchers, but experiencers too. That seems to be something that has been threading through all these topics for a long time. I mean, if you look back to the Western European fairy folklore, they were obsessed with artists and musicians. They'd abduct a fiddle player to come play at the fairy ball for one night and return them, 10 years later or whatever. Oftentimes these unions that would produce offspring in those older stories were between someone of an artistic bent and one of the fairies. So there seems to be something that this other realm, and I do ascribe to a paranormal theory mostly, and I do think that a lot of these things are at least related, if not, variations on the same thing. There's something that this other reality really, really values about imagination and the imaginative realm. To the extent that I wonder if these things are not, somehow imagination made manifest, which isn't saying that, it doesn't have a reality or an objective reality or a basis for it. Like it's real. So the example that I always like to use is the one hill that I will truly die on in the paranormal is the reality of psi phenomena. Because if you look at Dean Radin and Daryl Bim, they've done some great work in the laboratory proving that this stuff exists. Like there's and if psi phenomena exists, that's in your head, it's interiorized, you can't touch it, but it interacts with the physical world, right? Similarly, since we're talking about where the footprints end, there have been some relatively prominent Bigfoot researchers who will say things like, well, Bigfoot can't be supernatural because ghosts don't leave footprints. And I'm like, have you ever read the old parapsychological research? Like one of the first means of ghost hunting was spreading talcum powder on the floor and waiting for footprints to show up,
There's a story in Austin about this. You put talcum powder on the back of your car over train tracks.
One of those mystery hill sort of
things.
And
the kids' handprints will show up and push your car off because the tragedy that was there, right? You put your car in neutral.
So what that illustrates to me, is that, a same thing with ghosts slamming doors and moving objects and stuff like this, or even, poltergeist, RSPK, poltergeist phenomena. We don't quite understand where the non-physical or the psychic ends and the physical begins, right? And that's why I like to sort of bring imagination and story into these ideas. A good friend of mine, Ren Collier, who's a sensible practicing occultist. Those are pretty few and far between, but Ren made the comment to me last year that he thought that the spirits were made up of pure story. And I love that idea. And it's an idea that I keep playing with in my head that I want to do something with in the future. But that boundary where the physical and the imagination meet and blend in that realm of archetypes, I think is a very fruitful realm that needs to be explored more. And if you had to sort of put a lot of my work into a category, it would probably be in that archetypal direction where we don't really have the tools to explore this, as Terence McKenna called it, never land, between the physical and the non-physical. A line of thought that I've been going on recently regarding the UFO thing is that human beings are predominantly physical with an important psychic dimension. And maybe the UFO is predominantly psychic with an important physical dimension. And that's why you get this strange elusiveness, but also burn marks in the ground, and scoop marks on abductees. There's something, I think it's got one foot on either side of that line.
I love this. One of your quotes in your books that I will say forever is that all fish swim, but not all things that swim are fish.
That's true. That's true.
I was
That's
like,
true.
Yes, of course. I mean, then we get to things like the evidence of absence, not the absence of evidence and shit like that. But it is interesting. I love, again, the way you phrase it, because it takes us, it seems to be that we invite some sort of spiritual element that is sort of this panpsychism into the fray. Or as, Mud Shadows is Castaneda called it. Any of this, I picture it as sort of a fog that's around that you sort of activate with you in either an area, condition, maybe it's astrological, maybe it's based on all kinds of things. And you enter into an area and then unlock something. Again, maybe timing, maybe serendipity and all this kind of stuff. And then your interaction with it feeds it because of, again, the subjective nature of the phenomena as well. People within this maybe sphere of influence will get a similar encounter if they're within the sphere of influence. People outside of it won't see shit. And then the people inside of it will even kind of interpret it differently, their experience. So again, this subjective nature offers that you have a lot to do with what's going on with this thing.
I love that for several reasons. Number one, I love the fact that you touched upon the complexity, because you'll have people come to you and say, oh, it's quartz deposits that cause the paranormal. And then you'll have somebody come to you 5 minutes later and say it's granite deposits or it's underground streams. I think it's a lot of different factors that combined with the person can make this stuff manifest. I also think that, even these individual questions have a lot of different answers. Like the UFO question is probably partially misidentification, meteorological stuff that we haven't understood or discovered, maybe atmospheric life forms, maybe extraterrestrials, maybe group psi phenomena, maybe spirit. It's probably a bunch of different things. You could do the same thing with the Bigfoot question. So I think that we really need to take a look at these things as a plurality of explanations as opposed to one, single thing. Also, the other thing that I love that you said was the importance of the individual. And you could probably say that what I'm about to say sounds anthropocentric, but these experiences often seem so tailored to the individual person, and they have a meaning in that person's life, and they often serve an initiatory purpose, if I could go down that route, in these people's lives. And I think that when we try to remove ourselves from this, when you try to put it in the laboratory with that objective, impartial setting, then it just disappears. Like it vaporizes. And that's been part of the problem, I think, is that the reason that we don't have better evidence for this stuff is because it appears in, you already dropped an F-bomb, so I'll do it too.
Oh,
it
bro,
appears
please,
it appears in dire fucking circumstances, I've spoken to plenty of people who were, for lack of a better term, at the end of their rope, and that's when something miraculous happened to them. I've spoken to people who were in life or death situations, and that's when they saw something, or just there's something about this that is personal, in the same way that dreams or synchronicities will speak to a person more than they will to a third party. And I think when you try to remove the individual and their expectations and beliefs and all that stuff from it, then you're going to get, I honestly don't know if there's going to be anything there in that capacity. And again, I'm not saying that this stuff doesn't exist, but I don't know if there's a there, but I know that there's a there here, And I think that I used to hate the idea that this stuff was self-generated, but I'm a little bit more sympathetic to that. The idea that the power of the mind can actually throw a giant hairy hominid into the forest that, the moment you leave the forest, it snaps out of reality. I don't know, but there is something personal about this, and and deeply moving and meaningful to a lot of these people, even in the terrifying encounters. It's still personal.
It is such a redirect. Near-death experiences. This is why the same thing. Like you, it's all tied into the same vein somehow, fabric woven in somehow. And it's fascinating that you said this. Of course, there's talks in Preston Dennett, who's going to be at our event, who also you quote in this book. I'm reading, and of course you quote Preston. I'm like, yes. And he's talking about an alien encounter, probably several that he's got in there, but he spoke of one specifically where a guy was about to kill himself, an alien showed up, a little graze, and stopped his ass from doing it. But would that have been an alien or a gray for somebody else? Like if it would have been somebody that believes in Jesus, it would have been aliens that came down, right? And so there does seem to be
Right.
sort of a anthropomorphization of you with the phenomena. Now I'm sort of in the camp lately that it's yes and, right? I sort of see this intellectually now where I get to stuck points of paradox, and then there involves surrender. So if you've got supernatural phenomena based on your RAS, your reticular activating system, how your paradigm receives this world, all the things you expect to see, and then when something anomalous shows up, perhaps it's a Mad Libs of sorts. It's just sort of an in like something crazy's here, but whatever you expect to see is what it's going to be times something else to level you up. And I think this happens in Missing Time as well. I've always thought about this, like why, if they're so fantastic and supernatural, and we can hear about these 20 and back programs, we hear about fairylands where you can go in for an hour and it's 10 years. Why then is there a gap of time that's noticeable, a missing element? And I think it is one of these stair steps into, oh, something happened, but you're not ready for the real thing yet, but this will get you there, sort of a thing.
Right. Yeah. Baby steps. It's acclimating you to it. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I resonate with so much of what you said. I mean, again, I have my suspicions about the way this stuff works, but whenever people come to me with declarations, I kind of get a little bit uncomfortable. And, even if it's, even speaking with some experiencers who have had firsthand experience, like I can accept that you have interpreted this the way that you have, and that you are being truthful in that, and that maybe even the aliens told you X, Y, Z. But when you say no, it's because of this, full stop, it's like, okay, well, this goes back all the way back to Emanuel Swedenborg, who was talking about how spirits always are deceptive and lie, and don't have to look any further than to the fact that if we were to believe every if we were to believe every alien that has told an experiencer that the world is going to end, it would have ended like 700 times by now, because there are all these prophecies that just never really manifest. Not saying that it's not real. I'm saying that whatever is on the other end of the phone, it might even not even be manipulating for sinister reasons. It might be manipulating for positive reasons, but whatever's on the other end of the phone is manipulative. And we see this time and again. I like that Mad Libs idea. I think that cultural expectation plays a huge role in this. A lot of what I've done is comparing the UFO stuff to the fairy stuff. And sometimes people get me a little bit backwards and they think that, oh, he's saying that the fairies were UFOs, or that today's UFOs are fairies. And I'm really not saying either of that. I'm saying that there's something that we don't have the language for that we sort of plug into our cultural and societal expectations. And then that's what we sort of graft onto it, and to try to map out meaning across it, right? And to that extent, in sort of that Mad Lib idea, I mean, there are a couple of different ideas that I've been playing with. One of mine comes from my mentor, Greg Bishop, who has put forth the possibility that these things, when you look at them, in whatever sense they are, and whatever ontological status they have, your brain doesn't necessarily know what to make of it, and so it finds a placeholder that just makes sense to you. And it doesn't mean that like everybody who sees an alien believes in aliens before seeing an alien, but it means like, oh, I'm in this cultural soup where people talk about aliens, so I guess it's an alien. And then it's almost like a positive Lovecraftian thing, like in Lovecraft, people see the unknowable and they go mad, and this, like, you see it and like you cope with it and you just sort of try to figure it out. I don't know. That might be what's going on. It might not, but it's an interesting idea. And I think that our paths of inquiry into this should try to incorporate more outliers as opposed to excluding other outliers and saying, well, those experiences are crazy, but mine are on the level. That I hate that level of thinking. Like if it's a durable hypothesis, it should incorporate as many outliers as possible. Or as Saint Terry of McKenna said, if it's real, it can handle the pressure. It's that's I really think that's where we need to be going. Yeah.
Dude, JoshCutchin.com, guys, located down below. I can see that the audience gets this wholeheartedly, why you've absolutely soared to the top of my favorite people list with a bullet. Number one. I mean, just so fucking fascinating because of, again, you have questions, man. That's what we offer here. Questions. And again, you take reverence in the fact that, yes, they experienced something that altered their reality, that you agree that they interpreted to the best of their ability with the information they have and the paradigm they have at the time. But this openness to see this phenomena like this, as well as the lack of hubris and ego it takes to be a little wrong or to be a little okay with not knowing, man, that's such a beautiful place, I think, that I see sweeping across the research community as, even if it's a fad, that's fine. Just take it and run with it, because it's going to, again, be your missing time that opens doors for you to go, holy shit, there's so many more things here to consider.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to watch that trajectory. To the first thing that you said, I remember the very first talk that I ever gave was at the Georgia MUFON meeting. And it was on the exchange of food and drink. It was based off of a Trojan feast. And there was an experiencer sitting in the front row, and she looks at me and she says, well, I've had a bunch of experiences with these beings, and I've never been given anything. And I said, well, I've driven a car for 20 years and I've been lucky enough to not have a blowout. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen, So I think that, but again, I still believe her that she's never had this particular interaction. So at the core of what I do is I try to believe experiencers, but not always. I don't, but just because you believe an experiencer doesn't mean you have to adhere to their interpretation of what was. Even if I believe that they said this, but I don't necessarily believe that that the being was being truthful, or that the interpretation is truthful, right? Because we have a lot of questions on this stuff. And I was going to say something else and I completely forgot what it was. So.
Do you know what it reminds me? That's okay. You know what it reminds me of, though, is sort of like conspiracies, right? When you kind of figure out that the government's not what it says it is, and that things are lying to you all around. We get to this point in spirituality, and really this Dark Night of the Soul really helped me see this so clearly, that yes, the other message on the end of the phone has its own motives. And so this is where sort of the spiritual community just, I look around and I go, holy shit, all you motherfuckers are into this, right? Just like those believing in that voting is going to change anything. It's almost another unraveling and sort of grabbing everybody just to step back a minute. And the difference here is it's not in the physical, it's exceptional. And they are getting connected with something, like you said. Yeah. Now, this could be archonic in nature and deceptive in nature, but again, it's inviting everyone to ask more questions, critically think, which let's have it. And the less traumatic, the better, right? But this opportunity for people to see this in new lights is something that's challenging even their belief in their beliefs. They abandon the old world, this physical reality, because it had nothing for them, right? In the same way that we found religion to be unlacking, or any other trauma thing. And then they find this amazing spirituality thing, maybe then invite something in to communicate them posing as something, let's say Archangel Michael, because I don't know, just as a placeholder, as a Mad Libs placeholder. And then all of a sudden they're now being manipulated throughout a consistent narrative, maybe, that doesn't go anywhere, but they're not questioning the narrative because it's in such a fantastic form. They can't step back from the awe of it to go, what's your motive here, dude?
Yeah, and I think that dovetails really nicely with what we were talking about earlier with imagination. Like, something that I've entertained the possibility of is that all of these interpretations are true for that person, right?
Yes.
If we are dealing with something that is imaginal, then in sort of their own little pocket reality, yes, that is exactly what the aliens told you is exactly what's going on. You know what I mean? And that's sort of a weird, heady concept to embrace. But I do see, as you alluded to earlier, this is what the other point I was going to make, there seems to be a trend towards more openness about these topics. Having said that, I felt like that trend was a lot stronger prior to the rise of this current disclosure season in the UFO community. I feel like we were talking about altered states of consciousness and things like archetypes, and then that New York Times piece dropped and it was back to talking about propulsion systems and anti-gravity. And it's like, was this a hard reset by the intel community? I don't know. But here's the thing that I always try to emphasize is that the folks in the disclosure movement, and I know we're going to talk about Bigfoot, but I'm hung up on UFOs for just one more moment. The folks in the disclosure community who are absolutely convinced that it's little green scientists coming from another planet and nothing more, they tend to be the people who, what's the best way to put this? Let's put this another way. The people who are actively promoting and advancing the disclosure movement are fully read in on how strange the UFO question is. They are reluctantly or willingly accepting of the fact that the supernatural, for lack of a better term, is tied up in all this. And I can say for a fact, and this is super coy, I'll talk to you about it at some other point, and anybody who runs into me in person, I'll talk to about this as well. But there are the people who are highest in the disclosure movement are reading some very weird books, right? They're reading stuff like, if not Ecology of Souls and stuff. I'm like, because they realize how deep this particular rabbit hole goes, and that it is tied up somehow in psychic phenomena and religious studies and all this other stuff. So that's what I would sort of always encourage people to do, is to really be open to how weird this stuff can get. And I'm sorry if that sounds judgmental or preachy or anything, but
Nope.
I would rather all of us maintain an open mind and find out it's just aliens or it's just Gigantopithecus in the woods or whatever, right? I would rather us all keep open minds and then come back to these more conventional narratives than for us to keep closed minds and there to be something that we never even entertain that's over here that we will never get to the bottom of.
Dude, you nailed it with that, but also nailed it earlier with this idea of like egregores, this almost sort of homunculus idea that it is all imagined. And when we think of that way, you just reminded me of Peter Pan, right? When little Tinkerbell's dying over there in the corner and you got to clap for her, you got to acknowledge her existence and send your attention her way to fuel her to life to then animate again. Now, if you don't believe in shit, it goes away. This is why they say to keep your ancestors alive, talk about them, you know? And
yeah. I was just going to say, you were, I just thought of this. Every now and then you run across fiction like Peter Pan or something that you're like, I think that's kind of close to the way it works. And another great example of that is American Gods. I mean, if you've ever had the chance to read that, these older deities in American Gods, they thrive on belief. And once you don't believe in them, they perish. And similarly, like the newer gods, the gods of technology, like get stronger and stronger. That's sort of the main through line through that book. And I remember reading that and being like, this might actually be kind of the way it works. And Neil Gaiman has always seemed sort of close to that threshold. We were talking about artists and paranormalists in general. He's always seemed like he's had a little bit more firsthand knowledge of this stuff than I think he lets on. So that's another good example of that. And I think you're right that, again, belief plays such an important role in this.
It's all of it. It's absolutely all of it. And beyond that, I see your role in it is where I've sort of inventoried my participation in this participatory universe lately. And what I feel is, or where I'm at now, my temporary truth for now, is that your attention is your only real currency here. And it actually, like the game at carnivals, whenever you squirt the water into the hole, it fills up the balloon and bursts. But you have all of these balloons everywhere that are dying for your attention, and they're brightly colored, and they've got, logos, and they've got new trailers out with hot chicks in them with big old titties, and like it's this thing that you're supposed to like look at all the time and fill your attention with. And when you do that, what happens is that your attention's not on your amazing book that you're writing or your tuba playing or something like that. And so I feel that this is a balance of energies where your job is to become a master of self and a curator of energies. And with this, your attention, where your attention goes, energy flows, like all these analogies. But even to the egregore concept, if you're not giving it your life, your attention, your focus, right, then it doesn't exist. Even down to the metaphors of inner harmony with the two wolves, right? Love and fear, which one grows? The one you feed. So and this is where we talk about turn off the news, like stop giving Bill Gates attention and he'll wither away into a little shell and fucking die and queef off into the wind or something, like Endgame style, right? I think that we're really animating this whole place by our belief in its power over us, which if you just remove that, then what happens?
Well, and there's a phrase that you used in there, which I absolutely love. It's the temporary truth, right? I have several guiding figures in what I do, but one of those was John Keel, who famously said, belief is the enemy. And again, my mentors in this topic have always really encouraged me to keep thinking and keep evolving and evaluating my thinking and reevaluating my thinking. I hope I never get to the point where I say, oh, it's just this, and then I stop looking at different angles, because I really think that, a mind that is set in its ways is calcified and brittle, and I think that I hope that anything that I write in the future is going to contradict everything that I've written in the past, because it shows like just a new way of thinking about these things.
But what an authorship. How many professors are sitting there willing to hand their tenure over to people who have new ideas because theirs is antiquated? You hear of scientific progress being stopped constantly because, but he's got like 5 years left. He's going to die or retire, right? So we can't let this game-changing technology out for the all of world.
Well, yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, and I think the secret to that is to give up on the possibility that we're ever going to know what this stuff is.
Surrender, dude. This is it.
Yeah. I mean, so many people have started their journey into this being like, I'm going to be the one to get to the bottom. And I really don't think you are. Like, even if this is something I've said about disclosure in general, is that unless your disclosure is fucking weird and unless your disclosure deals with some fundamental questions of reality, like panpsychism that you mentioned, or idealism, or just these really like mind-bending concepts, it's a partial disclosure at best. Because that is baked into this thing, whatever it is, in all these domains, I think, but especially in the UFO topic.
And then it's still deceit at a level, but it's managed deceit for your perception so that no structures crumble because, there's an economy to account for, and it's,
And we're past the point of so I was at Dragon Con last year and had a UFO panel, and I opened it up by saying, because it was on disclosure, right? I opened it up by saying, okay, imagine the person that you didn't vote for in the last election. Now imagine that they're president, and now imagine that they're telling you that the UFOs are aliens and that they're real. Do you believe them? And of course, like, nobody does. So we're past the point. And you could sort of extrapolate that beyond America, because there's this division everywhere. We're past the point where anyone is going to accept what authorities say on the ontological status of these things, right? So you really have to say, okay, even if we do get something that half of our world at best treats as a smoking gun, it's still not going to be an open and shut case. So the real disclosure is for you. And I know that sounds like a Hallmark card, but but it really is. Like, it's about you. I've had a couple of ghost experiences. I've never seen a UFO. I've had some Bigfoot adjacent experiences, but I've never seen Bigfoot. I don't have to, because I've talked to experiencers and I've read the literature, and I've sort of Goldilocks my way into saying, yeah, there's something to this. There's something to this that is not explainable by conventional worldviews, right? And that, to me, is disclosure. Like, it doesn't have to come from an authority structure. It has to come from you and from your own, due diligence, and from your own openness and your own compassion, quite frankly, listening to these experiencers. So I think that that's a big takeaway too, is that don't overlook small d disclosure because you're looking for big D disclosure. And I just said big D, but you know what I mean? Yeah.
I'm going to cut that as a clip. Josh got your big D disclosure, and it's just you in like a bikini that I've obviously made on Photoshop. Not well. The tan lines don't even match. You've got tattoos that aren't there.
Yeah.
Fantastic, and you're not wrong. And this is a fantastic thing. I've been asking the question since I started the show 3 years ago. Is disclosure important to you? And this is not to say like, are you excited, or what do you think about disclosure? I phrased the question in a very important way, because is it important to you? And some people will pick up on this, and they'll actually, a lot of folks throughout the time, and it just depends on who you're talking to, excuse me, but you can see how it's changed, where, number one, they're thrown off by the question a little bit, like, of course it's important, and then they kind of get this, well, of course, because then it validates, and I'm sitting here just like, oh my God, it's such a rework back. It's like, let's grab where you are is awesome, and you're cool with silver things flying around the sky, dope, but let's come back to the point to where you're outsourcing your ability to determine your reality based on somebody else's desire for you to observe it that way. Yeah. This is one of the most, and this is what you reminded me of it earlier. I've been saying it for decades. The most dangerous sentence ever spoken by man is, well, that's the way we've always done it. And man, it's this time. It's authors like you. It's these conversations. It's this community. We're done with that shit. We don't care what the government says about it. We know you're full of shit, and we're not going to listen to what you say. In fact, what you tell us is more telling about your true motive. If you look at it, dude, and I know you've seen this, they have generals posted up there, and then they talk about how they can't talk about things, but they'll talk about it later and giggle in front of you with your tax dollars, and it's horseshit.
Yeah. And the past 70 plus years have shown that this is always a tool for manipulation. And you don't even have to incorporate the number of psyops that we've also demonstrated as existing, to realize that the UFO topic in particular has always been a ground for public perception and and for I mean, you know, there was this recent hubbub a couple of years ago about the Navy taking UFO sightings, and everybody's like, "Oh, the Navy's interested in UFOs." I'm like, or they're crowdsourcing, you know, or they're crowdsourcing eyes on the sky for. So yeah, so ufologists are so obsessed with exopolitics that they forget about geopolitics, right? And the fact that like we're in tumultuous fucking times, and it completely is in the best interest of these you know authority structures, the military, to have eyes on the skies, you know, to be looking at these things and looking for these things and to be reporting these things. And again, this is not me saying that UFOs aren't real and that there isn't a physicality to them. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying that I think that a better authority on this is going to be a face that you see that comes out of a tree than it is a general, right? You know what I mean? Like, I just think that that's closer to what this is than getting something from somebody who's in a uniform.
And here's the thing to it too. If we come all the way full circle, then your attention is what's fueling whatever results in your reality. So if your attention is focused on that the government's fucking you constantly, you're very invested in that concept and you haven't taken it to alchemize it to empower you, and you've just said, well, I'm just going to follow this, and then therefore anything the government tells you is then therefore going to be real for you, then maybe you're the one creating this Project Bluebeam. Maybe it's not a technology. Maybe all of you are going to, as Terence McKenna said about the phenomena, it's a psychosemantic one. And so maybe you are manifesting this out there, and maybe y'all are all projecting this damn thing out of the sigil of Lucifer, out of your ocular spots there in your head. And maybe that's what this is. Just as we've all noted, and we can see here with the maturity in the phenomena that we have, is that it's very subjective. Get your inner shit together. You know, this is why we're always talking about tend your garden. You know, these types of things. Get where you are right. And that's where you're going to manifest in front of you.
Yeah, put your own house in order.
That.
And you know, you mentioned the dark night of the soul, and I just can't. You mentioned that, and we've talked offline about it. I had my own dark night of the soul in 2020. I checked myself into rehab for alcoholism. I'm open about that.
Congratulations.
But part of the reason I'm open about it is because I love it. Like, I look back on that and I'm like, that sucked, but it was so great. And the amount of synchronicities that popped off around that time was just staggering. I'll provide one example, but before I get there, you know, I journaled the whole time, and I was just writing about archetypes, and like the only thing that really I think saved me was sort of nesting myself within this Campbellian hero's journey and like pulling on archetypes and all this stuff. And I was just journaling the shit out of myself and talking about the belly of the whale and all this stuff. But you know, when I came back after that, like the synchronicities and the spiritual things that just happened were just out of control. The one that I cite as being the most like, you know, synchronicities, again, as I alluded to, are very personal, and like usually they don't mean much to third parties because it's like, well, whatever. But the one that blows my mind was, you know, I have these two boys. They were not even two at that. They were not even really two at that point. And I get some anxiety every now and then about like all the things that all the software I feel like I need to upload into them, you know, all the little details, and like I need to teach them about supply side economics and the October Revolution, like
Absolutely
all this just wild stuff. Well, anyway, but you know, but one of the I was in the middle of one of those fits, and I was like, for some reason, I'd seized on Aesop's fables. And I'm like, Aesop's fables, I've got to teach them Aesop's fables. How did I learn Aesop's fables? Was it through cultural, you know, osmosis? Did I read Aesop's fables? Maybe I watched cartoons of Aesop. I've got to go. Okay, when I get home, I'm going to get them a copy of Aesop's fables, and I come home from my therapy, and I put them in the stroller, and we go for a walk around the neighborhood. The entire time I'm saying to myself, Aesop's fables, Aesop's fables, Aesop's fables, Aesop's fables. There's a lot of lessons in Aesop's fables. I need to get them Aesop's fables. I get home, I get the boys out of the stroller. I get a call from my mom. She says, hey, we're at the beach. We're at that bookstore that you love. I just picked up the boys something that I think that they'll really enjoy. A book of Aesop's fables.
Good Lord.
And that's just so hyper specific. And those things were popping off, but they have sort of a taper, right? In my experience from this. I got back home after my rebirth, after my death and rebirth, right? Dying to an old way of living and coming back to a new one. and they were just popping off all the time. But as you sort of acclimate yourself to this new life, I found that they sort of tapered off, and they, not only in terms of frequency, but in terms of how dramatic they were, and now they kind of happen every now and then. But that's the archetypal death and rebirth, initiation, hero's journey thing that I think that a lot of these topics speak to. I mean, certainly near-death experiences and shamanism, and arguably the alien abduction experience, relate to that. I found some examples of Bigfoot encounter speaking to that as well. So I think that, again, that's something else that sort of situates us at the center of this, like that initiatory experience and that down payment that you have to make, that down payment that sucks, because that's what every offering is, right? Like, you're giving up something that you would eat in the most basic version, right? You're giving up something that you would eat to whatever this other thing is. And sometimes that can be, a food or a drink or tobacco, or it can be a way of living. It can be your literal life. It can be a pack person or something else that you give up. But once you do that, something on the other side, that little spark just gets set off, and it appreciates it. And I don't know why, and I don't know what that is. As a Christian, I have a lot of cognitive dissonance in this area. I tried to sort of unpack some of that in the afterword to Ecology of Souls, but at the same time, I can't deny that there's something that really appreciates it when we give up something. And that giving up, even when it's, obviously I gave up something that was bad for me, but like, even when you give up something that you shouldn't want to give up, even when there's a tragedy, that still seems to leave an imprint on this other side that is appreciated and noticed. And you get goodies, I don't know why, but you get goodies in the form of synchronicities and experiences and stuff. And I've seen that time and time again, like we were talking about earlier, about people at the end of their rope, who have these experiences. Like, there's something to that. And again, this is not a conversation that you get to when you're talking about metamaterials and propulsion systems and anti-gravity technology. But I think this is the conversation that's worth having. You know what I mean?
In more ways than I could ever explain. Yes, we know what you mean, brother.
Yeah.
That was beautifully articulated, and thank you for that. And it is. These times, I sort of look at it, and I'll relate it to you as a musician, because I've used this example several times. Dissonance, right? Dissonance in music. You know the power of this. God, and when you look at our life as an experience of a piece of music, of a symphony, right? And we're instruments being played from a spiritual level. It's a beautiful sort of way to see this. And I think this is why a lot of musicians have this, the imagination, but also the orchestration of energies and the balance of it.
That's such a good analogy, because I think the reason that a lot of the serialists and some of the post-tonal composers like Schoenberg and whatnot, don't always resonate with people is because it's mostly just dissonance, and there's never that resolution, because they didn't invent dissonance. Dissonance existed a long time ago, and that's a lot of what we associate with romantic music is that dissonance, but there's always that tension and then resolution. And then sort of once you get into the early 20th century, it was just the tension. That's why it doesn't sit well with people. But that tension and resolution has always been there. And so that that's a beautiful metaphor, and I fucking love it. I'm gonna probably steal it.
Please, it's no stealing. This is all. This is such a co-collective thing here. We're just. I love this, Josh. And yes, that's a thing I've used all the time, because we'll purposefully put it in music. I'll go, ugh, it's nasty, but God, it makes the thing after it's so much better. And if you had just gone from clean to clean, it doesn't have the same enjoyment that you do, because you didn't come from hell before, and that's hell on your ears. You're like, ooh, get off of that, you're fucking it up. Oh, I see what you did there. It's this wow. But from our perspective, right, as passengers of this experience, we feel it's this co-collective process as well, where you are the instrument being taken through a piece of music, but you haven't read the music yet. But to keep in tune is your job. And really, it's just to keep in tune with you and not to be swayed too far one way or the other. Keep this middle path. But I also find this dance in the dark, these dark nights of the souls are so important, because like you with your quitting drinking, congratulations, by the way. I did 1 year after you and haven't looked back. And I'm great. You're transcending these bloodlines, right? It happened in my family until it happened to me, kind of thing. And I'm proud of you, man. Congratulations. It's not easy.
I appreciate it. And again, my therapist would probably be mad at me, but I haven't talked to him in a while. I haven't been going to meetings, but I've just been embedding myself in this. And I think, again, someday down the line, I will probably right? Like the Jungian guide to recovery or something. Because like once you do nest yourself within everybody has a hero's journey in their life, right? And once you find where you are in that, I think it helps because
It
I
does.
think that the universe, God, whatever it is, wants you to slay the dragon. Like that's the arc that is always fulfilled, and that's the arc it wants you to fulfill, right? And so once you can sort of map that onto your life and make meaning in that way, again, I was just thinking about Jung and Campbell the whole time. It really did provide me a roadmap for where to go next. And like, oh, if I go back to this, like it's corrupting that archetypal journey, right? I mean, heroes have their new set of challenges. I'm not saying that, but like this is not the natural order of the universe. And to go back to that is sort of defying the natural order of the universe in a way for me. And like again, that's just what I say to make it work for me. And it seems to be doing wonders so far, knock on wood. So yeah. But that's the thing. Like I think that UFOs are tied up in recovery, and I think that they're tied up
And trauma.
in trauma
They're both.
and making meaning and all these things. And I know I'm having a conversation with the right kind of minds when the topic eventually goes in that direction. When it's just like stuck on stories and I love the stories too. Don't get me wrong. But when it's just stuck on stories or it's talking about, the nutsy boltsy aspect of it, then I'm like, well, that's still an enjoyable conversation, but it's not like what this conversation can be,
Right.
you know?
And that's this. It's not an interview. It's a conversation. That's what I always invite my guests here to participate in. You're just a brother. We're expanding consciousness here. That's the motto of the show. The expansion of consciousness cleverly disguised as a podcast. And all of these critical thinking exercises, especially with the phenomenal cases, the interpretations of reality that you've noted in here, and then also your own insights and connecting these fascinating things in amazing ways is just incredibly important. But it comes from such an interesting place. And I love getting to know you more, man, getting to know your story because it's real, it's relative, but it's fantastic. And of course you've ended up so awesome is because you've had such an incredibly cool story, but really chosen to experience it to its breadth and then wrote about it. But you just also happen to be a hell of articulate observer and then decided to write it down for everyone. And just thank you, man. Thanks for the journey you're on and thanks for sharing it with us.
Well, I appreciate the kind words and, a lot of, I think that we all are products of the people that we spend time around and the people that we talk to who, even if you don't parrot what they say, like they've said things that have led you in certain ways. And I have a lot of people in my history, and not just paranormal people, but like, even the musical teachers that I've had and stuff have said things that have allowed me to think in different ways about these things. And so I owe a debt of gratitude to them and all the conversations that I've had along the way. Now I've got a new metaphor about dissonance and, and tension and release. Yeah, that's great.
Love it. Please use the shit out of it. I can't wait. By Brandon Thomas. I can't wait. I'll read it in one of your books. I can't wait.
Absolutely.
And it's something interesting you said too about your therapy. And I'm gonna relieve this dissonant note because it rang on one, and I'm gonna relieve it, and then we'll move on. Okay. You mentioned that you haven't been in a while, and you sort of had this "my therapist wouldn't approve it," kind of vibe, and that's okay. But what I want to say here is that also, psilocybin was a great therapist for me for a long time, man.
Yeah.
And it's the Alan Watts thing. At one day, and I mean, it took 2 trips to figure this out. One day, I just realized that I needed to hang up the phone, right? That the message was received, and I needed to hang up the phone, and I was done with that part for now. Same in the way that you did with the alcohol. It was a therapy tool. It helped you cope for this shit. I think that you're handed trauma and coping mechanisms at the same time ancestrally. So all of us are handed like, here's how we're going to fuck you up, but here's how you're going to deal with it. And then we just sort of pass this down the line. But you chose, like I did, to stop it there, right? But with that comes the wave or the tsunami of trauma that your ancestors handed down to you that now you're standing in the sand with your sword there saying that stops here, right? But with that, you're going to go through different modalities, and to be free to say this worked for me temporarily, because really, Josh, you mentioned it earlier, but temporary truths is the only one belief that I have. I have one belief in this place.
Everything's temporary.
It's temporary.
Yeah.
It's gonna change with new info. And that is, I think, the most free place you can be, because you abandon this sort of flag determinate, dying on hills and shit. I'm not dying on any hills. I'm saying let's move through this, and it's enabled this path of synchronicities, like you said, to just unfold. And then a guy just writes me and says, hey, I'm going to send you books, and ends up being one of my favorite damn people and authors ever. So it's just this beautiful, beautiful place, man. And to take it as that and to know that there's going to be dissonance, but also to know that the resolve is so much better. Tarot has this figured out. Tarot card readers call it the tower moment, right? It's this time in your life where everything goes to shit, and there's so many metaphors for this, but as a musician, dissonance is the one. But we know as musicians that dissonance creates a beautiful resolve in the same way that tower moments strip down the things that don't move forward with you so that you can fully embody the beauty of the next whatever, right? The next measure, let's say.
Yeah. I mean, the people who have integrated their recovery wouldn't trade rock bottom for a damn thing.
Nope.
You know, and again, like I kind of have gotten to the point where I think kind of fondly, not in terms of like where I was or anything like that. And, you know, everybody's rock bottom is different, but in terms of where I was, but not thinking about in terms of that with nostalgia, but in terms of thinking about, you know, the potential and, you know, kind of proud of the bravery and all those things that are mixed up in that. So, and I like that idea of like, you know, you standing saying it stops here. I mean, that's so much. I actually incorporated a lot of this. Did I send you my novel?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. This is I call it a Appalachian addiction goblin trauma drama.
Please say that again.
Appalachian addiction goblin trauma drama. And you know, I guess it's kind of predictable because it's like, you know, it's people say write what you know about, and I'm like, well, recovery, musicianship, and goblins. So there we go. So, but that was, you know, it was just a chance to express a lot of these ideas and how they nest within this broader framework, you know, because there are comparisons to be made between the paranormal and recovery. And I tell you what, at some point, if I can do it ethically and get IRB approval for it, I would love to do like a longitudinal survey and book project based on the number of people in recovery who have these experiences. It is crazy.
Dude, that's
the number
brilliant.
of people who will say things like, you know, just not only the good stuff afterwards, but like the stuff and their rock bottom. Like there's a lot of overlap. And of course it makes sense. Everybody's altering their consciousness, right? It makes complete sense, but it'll be interesting to have that as a data point in this broader context.
To quote Emily Trinkus for my Dark Night of the Soul, she quoted this, but it aligned perfectly. I found an evil in my life that I wasn't willing to recognize was there. And that's the truth of it. It's it felt like this archon, this I didn't see or anything, but I felt this thing like projecting a carrot on a stick that was attached to my back that led me in a direction, colored my reality in a certain way that made sure that I hit these points and then just sucked the loosh or this energy off, right? But that was a metaphor to lead me to something else, right? And it's fascinating the way that this can be interpreted because I don't feel that I have the sight. Like I don't see things. I haven't had a UFO experience, anything like that. And so, but what I can see is an interpreted reality of people that do say that they have the sight. And I will take it one step further and say that I believe you. I believe that you are seeing something. I'm not just going to write you off. And then with this, where I'm at now, whenever I feel those things, I can see how somebody would have seen it and interpreted it as this physical thing that created in front of them. And then you look at a book like Jonathan Black's Secret History of the World. There's a lot of secret histories of the world, but this one, guys, I highly recommend. He talks about the consciousness evolving from this vegetable consciousness to animal consciousness and all these metaphors riddled in ancient religion and everything, even the metaphor of the vegetable consciousness that we were in stick form from Moses throwing the stick down, turning into a snake represented our ascension into animal consciousness, right? And the snake in the Garden of Eden. So all these fascinating consciousness experiments and observations about how we've changed and how we've literally interpreted our reality differently, which has made our reality different. You just look at like concepts like the invisible ships or like color palettes. Like we didn't have the color blue for the first 100,000 years or whatever, right?
Right. Yeah. This is something that I think speaks to a resonance in the work of Charles Fort, and he talked about certain dominants that we progress through. And some people, you know, a dominant of I think was like an enlightenment or like higher thinking dominant, but he perceived a shift from that into a dominant of witchcraft, for lack of a better term, which I think is kind of bearing itself out in terms of, you know, the way we're talking about UFOs and the way that people are embracing astrology and paganism and stuff. And, you know, I see it as a positive thing in opening up the possible belief in these other things that are very much happening. But what gets sort of glossed over in the fort model that people don't talk about is it's not necessarily that, oh, we're paying attention to these things. It's that these things become more and less true depending upon which era we're progressing into. So I think that UFOs always were real, but I think that they're more real now. And I think that,
Right.
yeah,
Because more people are
yeah.
clapping like
Right,
Tinkerbell to keep them
right.
alive, and then it's
Yes.
changing. And because it's not going to
100%.
give you answers. Like Jacques Vallée, I mean, he's got the truest assessment of this. It's consistently inconsistent. But with that, it brings about more questions and your inability to really pin it down to one thing. But I think it's always going to do that, right?
Yeah. And in that Marshall McLuhan sort of way, like, is the medium the message, you know?
Yes.
And that's something that, you know, maybe the UFO just exists to make us confront things, you know,
That right
our
there.
religion, our spirituality, our science, our sense of who we are, everything. It confronts everything, and that might be the point, rather than sort of where it comes from or where they come from. Like, I'm a fan of thinking about the UFO as an archetype in that sense. Yeah.
It's dangling keys in a boring reality. And it shows you that there's something phenomenal here, just beyond the beauty of nature, which you can absolutely get wrapped up in. But there's also a lot of mismanagement in the perception when you talk to other people. And when some people have these experiences, again, and it's dependent on your disposition. So it all comes back to tending your own garden. It's fascinating, man. Well, look, we are absolutely going to go into our afterthought here, but what do you think about a speed round, running through a couple of examples in your chapters here? We're going to do a speed round of where the footprints end, because this is just been an outstanding conversation, dude, but go ahead.
No, I was saying I love it. I love that
Okay,
idea.
love it. Okay, all right. So again, guys, all the ways to find Josh located in the show description. We are going to go balls deep also in the afterthought here. So make sure that y'all check the link down, sign up, support your favorite show for that, as well as all the other things that we've got going on. So again, guys, where the footprints end. Now, I want to stress as well that this is a 2-volume deal here. And again, if you guys write me in at expandingrealitypodcast.com, I've got one set left. First one gets it. This is one book. This is to be considered one book. And we're going to go into the evidence, the folklore, the volume 2. There we are. Next time. So let's do a speed round on this bad boy. Again, guys, all the ways located down below. Josh, I can already tell you're a regular here, and I can't wait for all these conversations, dude.
And to be clear, I'm kind of developing a reputation as like the 2-book guy, because I'm working on a project right now that's probably going to be 2 books again. It's not like a money-making scheme, I promise you. It's just that if you combine these books, like you take a look at ecology, you can see it back there. Volumes 1 and 2 in one book, even without the endnotes, which are a 3rd book, like I'm not even sure that the binding would hold up that well. So it's just these are always one book that's just arbitrarily split in 2.
We're freeing you from this burden of you needing to explain this in defense, brother. I love this. I love this concept, because now I've got this to look forward to. We've got 2 episodes here where we can really break this down, but also it's not about cramming a bunch of shit. And I love Jim Pennison, thank God for him, but he's got a 780-something page book back here that he said was not all of it. I wouldn't mind a second volume or split it. It's a thing to carry around, but you have conscientiousness when it comes to this. You're not cramming material in a small font where I'm sitting there and it's not fun to read. And then also you've got these incredible illustrations throughout this thing that break this up in such a cool way. And just straight out the gate, it sets the tone with this.
That's,
you open.
That's Tim Renner's pen and ink drawings, and he did not only frontispiece for both of them, but also spot illustrations. Those are not in the Kindle version, so that's why another reason, sort of an incentive for people to buy the print stuff, because I love print books.
We're analog folk here, dude. We're print folk as well. But like these, Timothy did these.
Yeah, Tim's my co-author, and he does fantastic illustrations. It's this, and that's something else that's probably a good juncture to address here. Like, this is as much Timothy Renner's baby as it is mine, maybe even more, because he was the one who came to me and said, "Hey, I want to write sort of the definitive book on the weird Bigfoot," and I'm like, I wasn't gonna write it. I was gonna take a break off, because this is about around the time that the boys are being born. I'm like, damn it, you got me in. I'm going to do it. So
I'm so glad. Thank you, Timothy.
It turned into this.
Give him a big hug when you see him. Thank him so much for the fact that you guys did this and that he did such a dope artwork for it. Do you have this as a print and t-shirt?
He has them as prints and t-shirts.
Good. Then I will be, let me know where I can value exchange for that and get several in my size and my wife's size.
You can find links to his Etsy shop at strangefamiliars.com. That's strangefamiliars.com. I believe it's Dark Holler Arts on Etsy, but you can find links to that on strangefamiliars.com, which is the name of Tim's podcast. Yeah.
And I'm going to be linking it down below.
Awesome. All right,
All right,
lightning
buddy.
round. Lightning round.
Lightning round. Let's do this, and then we're going to get into the afterthought. Definitely join us for that, guys. But here we go. Where the footprints in. Now, you intro with George Nolankowski's. Please say that word for me. 1973's Fayetteville County, Pennsylvania witness.
Yeah, the Kowalczyk.
Kowalczyk. Thank you very much.
This is a very famous case, and probably like the one that like people go to when they want to say, "Hey, maybe Bigfoot is weird." And again, as we've talked about earlier, like there's a lot of wiggle room for exactly what this stuff is. But it's a famous case that Stan Gordon detailed and brought to everyone's attention. It's a little bit difficult to pin down because there were some pseudonyms used in the original, and some of the locations were kind of fudged to protect anonymity. But the thumbnail sketch is that a large red ball of light the size of like a barn settled over this property in Fayette County, Pennsylvania on October 25th, 1973. Members of the family saw it. I believe the father and son went out to investigate. When they investigated, they saw these tall, shaggy figures with glowing red eyes approaching them along the fence line. They shot tracer rounds, which they had loaded, at the two approaching hairy hominids, which didn't really seem bothered. There was an illusion that I found later that when one of the tracer rounds hit, it didn't make a sound like it hitting a target. It made a sound like someone had dropped the bullet into like a pond. It made like a bloop, like a water splash sound, which is a great little detail. But anyway, all this vanishes. Police arrived shortly thereafter. The site is still glowing enough to read a newspaper by, they said. Stan Gordon and others were dispatched shortly thereafter as well to interview the witnesses. During one of the interviews with the main witness, George Kowalczyk, he fell on the ground and started convulsing. He came to and reported a vision of this Grim Reaper type figure that was bringing about some sort of apocalypse. I later found out it was bringing about the apocalypse unless some sort of savior figure could emerge. And you read between the lines, and it's alluding to the fact that he was chosen as in this capacity. Which again, talking about deception and giving people hero complexes, that's what this thing sometimes does, right? But what's interesting is that the after effects that he had are very consistent with what you'd find the after effects of someone having from a near-death experience or from alien abduction. Everything from poltergeist effects to major and minor predictions of the future. And he even got visited at some point later by supposed military officials, but the way that they behaved was very Men in Blackish. They showed him pictures of UFOs and Bigfoot and then said they'd be back and were never back. I think they might have even hypnotized him, I think, if I'm remembering that correctly. But anyway, I love that because you've got UFOs, Bigfoot, and weird spiritual stuff all and sci, right? All combined into one story. And then from there, it's about looking at. Again, I grew up as a monster kid, and I grew up reading Bigfoot books because Bigfoot was plausible to me, because I believed in flesh and blood Bigfoot, right? So this has been a huge shift in my thinking over the past, 5 or 6 years plus. But there are these outliers. There are these outliers that suggest that even if Bigfoot itself isn't strange, it hangs out with strange stuff. And not saying that every Bigfoot sighting involves high strangeness, but too many cases to ignore involve something that does not agree to the hypothesis that we're dealing with a relict flesh and blood physical hominid. Yeah.
And Tim's chapter, the next one, they're the company they keep. It's Nehemiah and Mary Cooper, right, in 1886?
I think so. So this is the Mount Nebo Church story, which was actually I had the chance to visit Tim a couple of years ago, and he showed me this actual graveyard. Since it's attached, cemeteries are standalone, graveyards are attached to churches. So he had chance to show me this graveyard, and it was they were coming home, and there was this thing that popped up out of the cemetery about 12 or 15 feet tall. It was this big, hairy, strange monster, and it's interesting because that's another thing that you can sort of take a look at as well is the number of UFO and Bigfoot sightings, sometimes together, sometimes separately, that you find in like graveyards and cemeteries, is substantial enough to consider them hotspots. Now, of course, the question is, are people who are in graveyards and cemeteries being really introspective and really observant? Who knows? But there do seem to be a lot of things like that happen. So yeah, it's just strange. And that particular chapter of Tim's is about how, like, hey, we have a lot of Bigfoot sightings in this area. Also, here's a list of the ghost stuff. We've got a leprechaun over here. Like, just these weird sightings that have always been in this area. And Tim happens to live in a particularly unique area of Pennsylvania. All of Pennsylvania is weird, but his area is especially strange. So yeah.
It's such a wild ride through this book. I'm telling you guys, you're gonna love this. So Waldengeist, I could just go deep with this, but let's keep it rolling here. All right,
Yeah.
Waldengeist, the Class B reports as well. What is it?
Wildnisgeist.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's German. And these Class B reports is what you're talking about. And this is one of the most famous, fascinating things in the first few chapters here is this idea of Class B, meaning that it's Bigfoot behavior, but no Bigfoots are witnessed. So it could be anything, right?
Yeah, this was in some ways the genesis for my entry point into Where the Footprints End, because this was an essay that I contributed to David Weatherly's Woodknocks Volume 3 for, which this has been noticed a lot of times. Other people have noticed it throughout cryptozoology, but that's part of what I do is I take a look at something that people have noticed a lot and not really expanded on, and saying, hey, how about we expand on that and see where it takes us, right?
Yeah.
That's what my second book, The Brimstone Deceit, was about. It was all about smells and stuff like that. Yeah. So but this particular idea is the fact that there's a whole subset of Class B reports on the BFRO website that describe all sorts of Bigfoot type stuff without seeing a Bigfoot, because that's a Class A report. So we're talking about stuff like wood knocks, strange smells, strange voices, footprints, thrown rocks, and stuff like that. And what I think is interesting about these Class B reports is that if you took all those and put them in a house, nobody would talk about Bigfoot. They'd be talking about poltergeists or hauntings, right? So the idea is that maybe some of the stuff that's been classified as Class B reports isn't really Bigfoot, or maybe it is. We'll get to that in a moment. Maybe it isn't really Bigfoot, but maybe it's more along the lines of poltergeist phenomenon, and it's just a poltergeist in the wilderness, a wildernessgeist, wilderness spirit. Now, what's interesting about this too is that you start finding these things that suggest that Bigfoot actually might be a poltergeist manifestation. There are plenty of reports of hairy, disembodied ape arms in poltergeists and hauntings and such, but also the other place where you expect poltergeists to show up is in seances, because it's a lot of times how they would communicate would be with knocks, which is just like wood knocks in the wilderness, right? But there have been cases. There's a famous one by Stanley Gooch, a parapsychologist, where people have manifested ape men in their seances, and it's like, well, okay, that suggests that there might be that what we're seeing in the wilderness might not be a large hairy hominid, but might be something. You can call it a forest spirit, you can call it a thought projection. I don't know what, but it suggests that it might be more in line with that RSPK stuff, that poltergeist phenomena, than it is with just a big monkey in the woods. Maybe sometimes, but so much of this stuff. That's the other thing I like to try to do, is break apart people's thinking and think about how context plays such an important role in this stuff. You see a light in a house, it's a ghost. You see a light in the sky, it's a UFO. You see a light over an ancient stone circle in Ireland, and it's a fairy. And of course, lights are associated with the Bigfoot stuff too. It's just people are finally opening up to it, but a lot of times people will go out looking for Bigfoot in a Bigfoot hotspot, and they won't see Bigfoot that night, but they will see these ghost lights. And it's like, as Timothy has said to me, and I think this is super, super, super perceptive. He said, it's rare to see Bigfoot. It's rare to see a UFO or a ghost light. How many orders of magnitude is it to see them together, or in the same place, or in conjunction with one another, and for them to not be connected? You know what I mean? So that's something that he has said, and I have really adopted as sort of a standpoint. It's kind of the thesis of Where the Footprints End.
Beautiful. Okay, you mentioned fairies. Let's talk about fairies, shapes and sizes. Of course, the Green Man, Fairyland, and you mentioned knocks. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of the Venn diagrams of fairies and poltergeist overlaps significantly. So in that sense, it's not a surprise. But the thing that prevents people from thinking about Bigfoot in the context of fairy folklore is that we think of fairies as being, short, effeminate, tiny winged women, and that's a very like Victorian children's storybook sort of idea. The older original fairies could be any size that they damn well please, and just as often were the size of your average human being as they were tiny. The wings were non-existent before children's books and before art more specifically. I think the first instance was in a poem.
Do you know why?
Well, fairies were always described powers of levitation.
Right.
So that's probably part of it. Also,
and they were depicted in art with wings because that's how they depicted that. I heard that as well. That's a fascinating fun fact, isn't it?
There's a line of scholarship that fairies got smaller because of the advent of the microscope, and we were seeing all these unseen worlds, and we're like, oh well, maybe they're getting smaller, and so that's part of it too. But yeah,
that's something in ufology as well. What's it called? Damn it. It's called something where they make people smaller, and there's a lot of UFO reports of Preston Dennett has some in his books of people going on UFOs, either the room getting a lot larger or them being put into a box and shrunk to 2 feet.
Well, and this trips into ecology of souls territory, where like the soul was always imagined as being tiny, and sometimes in some reincarnative disciplines you had to shrink to re-enter a new womb, right? So you have this whole tradition of small or short souls, which speaks not only to the fairy thing, but also again to the UFO thing as well.
Yeah.
And sometimes I should say this too. The idea of pneuma, meaning breath, and soul and butterfly in the classical tradition, might have influenced the ascribing of wings to fairies as well. That butterfly, soul, breath connection, and a lot of times the soul would be seen as coming out of the mouth in the form of a tiny person, right? So that there's a connection there too. But if you look at some of these older descriptions of, especially this class of like goblin / household fairy, like goblins, the Peckhamderlin, and the brownies, a lot of times they would be described as little short hairy people with simian faces. And so it's like, well, that's kind of just hop, skip, and a jump to Bigfoot, to say nothing of the fact that people see Littlefoot, which is exactly what I just described. And they say, oh, it's a subspecies of Bigfoot or it's a juvenile Bigfoot, but who knows? But these things also appear. But also you have like, the Wadwos, which is the European wild man that was sort of big and tall and covered in fur and very closely associated with the fairies. And then, man, there is this absolute fucking rabbit hole of this conflation of Odin and Santa Claus and the wild man. Again, this is not me. Like, this is like, you will find, straight-laced anthropologists making this connection, right? Odin and the wild man and Santa Claus and satyrs and fauns and Dionysus and the green man. And then from that, again, you just pop Bigfoot right over into that because he's part of all that too. He's this, he's this forest being. Anyway, I mean, Wadwos speaks specifically to Odin, Wad, So, and then once you're in that territory, you start thinking about how these satyrs and fauns, which could be categorized as fairies, had this association with witchcraft because they were pagan and they got turned into our interpretations of the devil. And then how many places do you know around the United States that are Bigfoot areas that have the name devil attached to them? And there are some indications that pre-Columbian tribes used to use words like devil or demon or spirit in that sense to refer to their Bigfoot analogs. So it's just this big soup of just crazy stuff. Speaking specifically to Dionysus, comparing Dionysus and the Green Man is pretty straightforward. There have been some to say that one influenced the other, but I found after I was able to include this in Ecology of Souls. I found it after we wrote Where the Footprints End. There were references to a circular fairy dance in Europe that in the British Isles that was referred to as the Dance of the Green Man or the Dance of the Monkeys. And so again, that's a green man, monkey, ape man, Bigfoot connection right there. So that is its own, like, the whole wild man archetype runs so much deeper and broader than even I had ever suspected going into this project. And from wild man, it's just right there with fairies. The other thing I like to point out with fairies that was a real eye-opening moment for me was that, especially out west, you'll find people who claim that Bigfoot like to sneak into stables and braid horses' manes. I found an allusion to that in there is a Russian researcher who claims that he saw an almas, which is their version of Bigfoot, actually doing this. So who knows? I think that a lot of these braided horses' manes are people not, brushing out their horses before they put them up for the night. But braided horses' manes is a very common thing that you find in European cultures and over here. Over here in the 21st century, in the American West will say, oh, Bigfoot sneaks into barns and braids horses' manes. But if you were to take that exact same phenomena and transplant it to Devon in 1700, they would have said, oh, it was either, witches or fairies that would come in and braid the horses' manes to make stirrups for them to ride.
Yes.
And that specific belief of fairies braiding horses' manes has been imported to Nova Scotia and is still talked about some today. But, but we don't believe in fairies. So we see the same thing and we say, oh, Bigfoot sneaks into stables and braids horses' manes for aesthetic reasons, I guess. Who knows? Yeah.
Maybe he braided it for his fairy friends to ride the horse, Because then you get into witches as well. So let's move into witches here, dude. So witches. So there's tons of hairy witches. You've got witches' knots, which you've already talked about, and then werewolves and belts and girdles and these things being their ability. So please, witches and how that ties in. Yeah,
this was an odd one because so there are a lot of different things you can unpack, as you alluded to, hairy witches and this and that and the other. There are even some instances where children saw Bigfoot and described it as a witch. A big hairy witch lives back there, that sort of thing. There's an argument to be made that the Alaskan version of Bigfoot, Chonokwa, is sort of a witch herself. But on a more specific level, you do find testimony from Europe during these witch trials that witches were bulletproof, basically. That people would shoot upon witches and the bullet would bounce off their chest, or that you take a witch's hair and try to cut it with scissors and it would actually break the scissors. And this, to me, seems to resonate with the fact that the Bigfoot more or less seems bulletproof, right? I mean, otherwise we'd have a body. But there are people who fire on these things and say, there's no way I miss it. It didn't even flinch. Now, we can talk all day we want to about specific anatomy and how robust and how many bullets Bigfoot can shrug off. But to not expect some sort of reaction, there have been people who have killed grizzlies with a pistol. Doesn't happen often. But, there are videos of bears getting hit with birdshot, and even they react, they stop. It's not like they just keep moving like Bigfoot does and not even flinch. So that speaks to it a bit as well. The girdles and belts thing is something that I did not expect to find, but another fascinating subset of Bigfoot research that I just adore because it's so weird. I love the high strangeness. I love high strangeness. Is clothed Bigfoot, Bigfoot wearing flannel shirts or Bigfoot wearing jeans. But I would say that the most commonly reported, in terms of what I've seen, the most commonly reported article of clothing that Bigfoot wears is a belt. Sometimes in these Bigfoot UFO stories, it's like a super high-tech belt, but other times it's just a belt or a girdle or a loincloth. And if you look at this, if you look at these European witch traditions, to make someone into a werewolf, sometimes you would be given by a witch a special girdle that was enchanted. Whenever you put on the girdle, you turned into the werewolf. So you have a belt that turns a human being into a hairy biped, and that for that to reappear in the Bigfoot stuff. Again, I don't think that they're literally witches giving people belts and turning them into Bigfoot. I think it's this archetypal thing that manifests that way, and it's like it's trying to speak to us symbolically. I think symbolism is like the lingua franca of this stuff. And it's trying to speak to us symbolically about as a shared society, our roots and our beliefs and our thing. And that's why you see this manifestation. So yeah, that was another thing that just kind of blew my mind. You can also make an argument, as even Lauren Coleman has, that the level of overlap between these alien big cat sightings, these large Black Panthers and stuff, and Bigfoot sightings is pretty close. Like areas that have one oftentimes have another. And that puts you in the mindset not only of shape-shifting, but also of witches and their familiars, because, witches always had these sort of smaller animals, not cougar-sized, but smaller animals, sometimes that were, black cats. So there's some interesting connections there as well. And also, I don't want to forget this either. The number of indigenous stories where a shaman turned his or her practice from serving the community to serving themselves and became an evil figure and then grew gigantic and hairy. I mean, there's no shortage of those stories either. So there definitely is sort of a dark magic witch connection there too, even amongst indigenous tribes.
God, so interesting. Dude, we've gone over ghosts a little bit here, and then the woman in white. Let's cap it on that, and then we're going to go into the afterthought. But please talk about the women in white, because they're always the white Bigfoot and shit.
this is something that Tim came to me with. There were a couple things like this where we both did this, and I was like, I don't really think that's a thing. He's like, did you know that women in white show up around Bigfoot sightings? I'm like, no, but as it turns out, they do. There's a famous story that was on the Sasquatch Chronicles website about somebody who had some pretty dramatic Bigfoot sightings and also had this strange woman. She looked like she was a vagabond who wore white clothing and had these gigantic feet. And they brought in a psychic, and the psychic told her that that woman was somehow the master of these Bigfoot on their property. And this particularly sent Tim down a rabbit hole. And there are allusions to it probably goes back to, if you look at it, this illusion between wild men and virgins, or apes and virgins. The idea that if you died a virgin, you would be ravaged in hell by an ape.
Well, King Kong carried that chick up to the top of the tower in a white dress.
Yeah, and once you start seeing this, it just pops off everywhere. Like, I even saw someone came to me and said, the angel on the Christmas tree is a woman in white, and the Christmas balls are orbs.
Brilliant.
And the tree, the Christmas tree, the Christmas tree, Santa Claus, we've already talked about that in the Wild Man. So
Amanita muscaria as well ties into that then.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if that's a thing, but that's sort of the way that these things work, is that they have sort of a resonance that you can overlay, even if it's inaccurate in terms of origin. They have a resonance that you can overlay onto things that sort of impart a new level of meaning, right? But this sort of idea of the association between women and white and Bigfoot set Tim, this was Tim's chapter, and he deserves all the credit for it, set Tim on this chapter, or on this path of taking a look at this Teutonic moon goddess, Frauperkta, or Bertha. And she had these giant feet that were sometimes goose feet, which puts you in the mindset of these three-toed footprints,
yes,
which look a lot more like bird feet, in my opinion, than they do look like hominid feet. But there are a lot of three-toed Bigfoot tracks that no one seems to have a really good explanation for, because, as we talk about in Volume 2, it ain't injuries, it ain't a deformation. It looks like it was supposed to be this shape because they're symmetrical. Anyway, Frauperkta, woman in white, moon goddess, big feet that were shaped like goose's feet. Sometimes there's even an illusion that Mother Goose is related to Frauperkta. Interestingly enough.
Think of the children.
Because the ones who followed her were the souls of unbaptized children, the Heimchen, who appeared as these little lights in the forest. There's the Bigfoot light connection, but also the Bigfoot connection specifically to Frauperkta is that her retinue was the Perkten, which can basically be described as the Krampus. Like, there were these large, hairy, horned wild men who ran along after her. So there's something there at a deep level. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to give you an obvious one, too. Think of what Mother Goose lives in.
What does she live in? I don't remember.
A shoe. And think of how big that shoe would need to be, which implies that a pretty big foot fills it, right?
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. That's amazing. I've got to look into the Mother Goose thing was something I stumbled upon just like a couple of months ago. I texted Tim and I'm like, "Yeah, did you know this?" He's like, "Nope," but it makes sense.
Tell Tim the Mother Goose thing with the shoe. I think he'll like it.
Yeah, I'm going to. But anyway, there are lots of other examples of like people who have Bigfoot habituation on their property, but their house also happens to be haunted. And guess what sort of a spirit they see in their house? A woman in white, which is, a famous archetypal ghost appearance. But what I find really interesting is the Ape Canyon incident, which, in case people aren't aware, I know that you know about this, but the Ape Canyon incident was a very famous Bigfoot attack that happened in July of 1924 around Mount St. Helens. You've heard about it probably in a lot of Monster Quest and stuff like that, because this group of miners was attacked by Bigfoot, and Bigfoot reached through the whole, anyway, reached through the cabin and whatnot, but nobody talks about how fucking weird Fred Beck was. And Fred Beck is the primary witness for the Ape Canyon incident. So you have the cryptozoological community saying, "Oh, look at this great story from this guy, but we're going to leave out all the other shit because it sort of it sort of weakens our position," right? Whereas I'm like, no, he said this, and he's your primary witness. Like, include this. The oddities around the Ape Canyon incident are pretty substantial. Fred Beck published a pamphlet that I think maybe he was a theosophist, but he at least had spiritual inclinations. The mining claim that they worked at Mount St. Helens was revealed to him by a spiritual leader, spiritual figure in his life, a spirit basically, that he called Vander White. So there's the woman white connection to Bigfoot. They were led there by an arrow in the sky, is what he says, which is sort of a UFO connection.
Phoenix lights. Yeah.
Yeah. The triangular shape. They get there to Ape Canyon and they start to notice some oddities. One of the things that they notice is a pair of footprints at a sandbar that's like 60 feet across. Someone even makes the comment, it looks like it was dropped. Whoever made those footprints looked like they were dropped down and picked back up. So that's where the footprints end, literally.
Yes. Yeah.
One of the guys takes a pot shot at one of the Bigfoot. That's what sets off the attack at Ape Canyon later that night. But during his time at the Vander White mine, Fred Beck claims to have had a pencil a port into his hand when he needed one. He didn't have a pencil, it just manifested in his hand. He also interacted with, I don't think we included this in Footprints, but he also interacted with a young girl in the forest who didn't have any parents around and spoke. I think if memory serves, she spoke to an invisible parent as if he was there and he wasn't. So like a ghost girl in the forest, basically. So yeah, the whole Ape Canyon story is really strange. And even Fred Beck himself goes on to say, basically, what I talked about at the beginning of our conversation, like there's a physical component here, but these are spiritual beings. These beings are spirit in some sense. So I always have an axe to grind whenever Ape Canyon comes up, because I feel like there's a certain level of disingenuousness that goes on when people you can't omit aspects of a story just because it goes against your pet theory, basically.
Yeah, because it challenges you.
Yeah. I as someone who thinks that this stuff is really weird, I have to deal with the nuts and bolts aspect, and I try to in terms of the conversation we had about physical versus non-physical. But the people who think about these things purely in physical terms just ignore all that woo stuff, and I'm like, okay, come on, let's at least play fair. So, yeah. But the woman in white thing is a rabbit hole that super deep, and honestly, that chapter that Tim wrote could probably be twice as long, with just what we've learned and collected in the 4 years since Where the Footprints End was published. And I'll be the first person to tell Tim I was wrong. There is something here. There's definitely something here. Yeah.
You put a third one where we pick the footprints back up again, where they appear again, right?
Right.
Continue the story. That's amazing, dude. Okay, guys. So want to give you the last word here, and then we're going to get into our afterthought. Guys, all the ways to find Josh, this amazing, amazing man, who, again, should be protected at all costs, is going to be found down below. All of his books. And again, guys, reach out. If you are interested in this, reach out, expandingrealitypodcast@gmail.com, and I will send you signed copies that he has sent me to send you graciously. So, dude, Josh, cannot thank you again, brother, for the work that you're doing, for your insight, just for you showing the fuck up, man. Thank you.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm looking forward to meeting up in Meat Space.
Yes, so that's the other thing, guys. He is going to, like I always sandbag this until the end of the episode, but he's going to show the fuck up over at our event in Georgia there in May 15th through the 20th. He's going to come hiking with us. He's going to have books there, so come hang out with us, guys. Check the link down in the show description for our Befriending Bigfoot event. All of that's linked down below. So, Josh, we'd like to give you the final word here, man. Give us something to go out. What gets you up every morning? What gives you hope? What keeps those feet hitting the ground to discover where footprints end?
I would say, that's a good question. That's a good question. What does give me hope? I would say to just keep on searching. And even when you think you found the answer, try to expand on it. Try to challenge it. Try to poke it. Push where there's mush, you know what I mean? So try to poke holes in your own pet theories and explore stuff from different angles, even the ideas that you don't like. Interrogate them just as strong.